the first one is around obstacles. So what aspects of the family justice, youth justice and child welfare systems act as obstacles to achieving good outcomes for adolescents? So that's to do with, we know that there's a lot of people working with young people in the system or in these systems, and they want the best for these young people, but it's not always being achieved. So what are the main sort of obstacles there? The second one is around sort of the 3 most important things you want to keep in these systems, and 3 you want to get rid of. And the third question is around sort of a vision for the future, and how the system could work better for older children, for adolescents that are in it.
I'm just reading over the first one. Okay, so I think some of the obstacles are connected to, and I'm going to say balance. And when I say balance, I mean balance between having a good support system as a professional where you are working, and having a good understanding about the people you're trying to support and who you're working for. So caseloads is obviously a really typical thing that people talk about, having high caseloads, having unmanageable caseloads. But I think having a support system where you're developing yourself and developing your skills to be able to meet the needs and address the needs, that's not always something that's readily available to you. So for example, in Camden, our Camden social work way of working is very systemic. So something really basic is like a systemic pause. So we take a systemic pause to reflect. We say that if you pause now, it makes more time for later. So being able to say to some of my social workers, and this is something they know I will say all the time, is can you just stop for a second and think about what it is that you really need to do? Think about what you really need from yourself. Think about what you need from me as your manager. Where are you struggling? Where are you going wrong? Where do we need to make more space? What do we need to be thinking about here? Where I find that is that really small minor element of pausing and stopping of systemic practice just is something that practitioners can't do. I find difficult to do. And if you can't stop and think, how can you know what to do next? How are you really gonna, and it's so basic, but you just are not gonna know. It's impossible. And then that balance of understanding, I think if we think systemically, again, we think about social graces and all different aspects of someone's lives. So gender, their sexuality, ethnicity, economics, such a big thing, economics and finances, class, age, what have you. And we think about all of those different elements and intersectionality and how that person that you're trying to support sees themselves. Without understanding all of those things, you aren't even going to understand how to maneuver through the systems that are developed in this country that you're ultimately working or representing, really, because this is how these families that you're working with and the young people you're working with see you. You're not going to even know how to maneuver through those systems for that person that you're working with. And that's what I think. I'm a Libra too, so balance is everything for me. So I think we have loads of larger issues around these systems, but in terms of thinking about the self as a practitioner, and the obstacles you may face as a practitioner, finding that balance or achieving either sides of that balance is just very challenging, and you have to be extremely committed to it.
With the pausing and stuff, and having the time to pause, is that something to do with the sort of the structure of the team of the local authority, or is it a capacity issue as well? You know, because if you have such a high caseload, is it possible to pause and stop?
So I think it's both. I think in Camden, because we're systemic thinkers, we have processes that align with that. So when, for example, on duty day, when there's a challenge about where a case should go, we have something called daily discussions. We will have a manager from long-term team, children looked after, early help, MASH, referral team. They're called BIT, FIT, like a different titles, but they come together to discuss the case. And we also have someone that represents the voice of the child. So someone will sit in that meeting and pretend to be the young person or the young people we're talking about and come from that perspective, literally talk as if I am this young person, this is how I feel, da, da, da. And that helps. That's a pause. That's like, okay, you're stuck. You don't know what you're doing. Pause, come together and think about it. When we have concerns around how do we escalate a case, do we want to escalate a case? Do we want this child to go into care? Do we want to do anything about it? We have to go and meet with CAMs and have something called a thinking together. So a thinking together, we come together and we do just that. We think about actually what has been done for this young person, what has been done for this family. Is there anything else that hasn't been done? Is there anything that needs to happen before you even go to a panel to discuss whether a child should go down or a family should be going down the public law outline, for example, to challenge whether this child should be in the care of the family or not. So in processes, I'm saying all that to say there are many different processes we have at Camden where we pause, right? But then there is another element of, as a practitioner, you have the responsibility to stop and pause and reflect, just like you have the responsibility to practice in a way that's anti-racist, anti-oppressive, anti-discriminatory. You have a responsibility to be accountable. You should be practicing autonomously, right? And then there's the space with your manager, the space with your peers, the space in group supervision, where actually if you're stuck, bring your case there. We have panels to bring your case to if you need to pause and think about how to move quickly. If that answers your question. So a bit of both.
It definitely does, yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's just fascinating to hear from, I don't know, inside a local authority and you know, working these cases day in, day out, you know, working with these young people. So that's great.
So the situation that I said this weekend,
yeah,
I did that throughout. So at every hurdle, every moment in the day, I just paused and said, okay, what have we got here? What can we make with this? And I think, honestly, that's how we were able to get the positive outcome and bringing those children home. Because we wasn't just reacting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, that makes sense completely. So that was in relation to the obstacles, all the things that you would take. I forget which question we asked initially.
Yeah, it was the one. It was one.
Number one. Okay, great. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if you want to talk a little anything about the three things that you would keep in like an ideal system. So I didn't know if you actually want to do the interview. Right? This is sort of turning into a little bit.
It's okay. So I guess question 2, the things that I would like to keep. Oh, that is a hard one. So there are other elements that I think connected to the child protection process that I think are really beautiful. So family group conferences, I adore family group conferences, and anything that brings in the family and the young people to help us make a plan, because there's such a huge power imbalance. And I think I'm really keen on having young people and their families and children to really have a say on how do we safeguard them? How do we develop them to be more protective? what works, what doesn't work. And I think family group conferences are a great way of doing that. At Camden, we try to have young people-led family group conferences too. And we're thinking about how we can have family group conferences to help the assessment process a little bit more, how we can think about unaccompanied minors a little bit more, because obviously they come here alone, and developing that for them in terms of how they are involved in making a plan. So I would say that is one thing that I'd like to keep. I think there's something about the child's journey that is important. So at Camden we call it the child's journey, and it's just when a child or family move through that process from early help to child protection or child in need to looked after. I think there definitely is a foundation that is needed for that to connect. At Camden, I think we do it quite well. So if a case comes in at the front door, we won't just send it to the brief intervention team. If we know that a baby or a child will end up looked after, we will send it straight to the looked after children team for them to do the assessment and keep the social work swaps a minimum. So I think that process is really key. I think it's important that we have it. I do think it needs to be tailored a little bit more depending on what local authority that is protecting children. But I think at Camden we do quite a good job with that. I feel like I'm like the Camden mascot today. I've worked in loads of local authorities, and I can honestly say that they have really mindful processes for children and young people. And I'm a very creative practitioner, and I feel that they are very good at tailoring their practice to young people and children, or even allowing people like me to think about creating something new that isn't there already. And then the third thing, I'm trying to think about the youth justice system a little bit, because I'm mindful that it's on this, even though I have a different stance. I don't know a huge amount about it. I think that there is a push for more judges and magistrates to be multicultural. I know that they're pushing that. I know it's a very small thing. I know it hasn't been achieved completely as yet, but I do know some Black magistrates and judges that are really trying to do positive things, and I think that's still needed, and not just of different ethnicities, but of different class and backgrounds is needed. Like whether a young person is Black, white, Vietnamese, what have you, they need to have someone that understands them on that bench and has the confidence to challenge. So I think that's something I'd like to keep, and something that I'd like to be pushed a little bit more.
That's great. I mean, do you think there's also something about like the court process as well there? I don't know if you had any thoughts on just, I don't know, the nature of the hearings and things like that.
Yeah, so I've spent a little time in the youth court because I led on domestic abuse cases in Hackney Specialist Domestic Violence Court for some time, and I had to attend some youth court because, you know, domestic abuse starts at 16. The process overall is very unpleasant for anyone that's in it. I think that as much as I don't like it, that comment is contradictory, because it's meant to be unpleasant. You're not meant to want to enjoy going through that process. But I do feel that, yes, as much as it doesn't have to be enjoyable, does it have to be punitive? Does it have to be abusive? Because the realistic perspective is it often is an abusive space. Do we say, okay, we don't treat people as human beings? I don't think that that's acceptable. And I think also in the family court system, I would say the same. And it's really subtle things. So, for example, I attended family court last week, Monday, and I wasn't getting let in by security. It was very difficult. I was outside for a long time, and I showed my badge and explained what hearing I was here for, etc. And the security guard still challenged me, saying that I was the mother on the case. And I had already shown my badge, and it was challenging. But also, if I was the mother on the case where we're discussing removing my child permanently from my care, that doesn't mean you should talk to me like that. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to be emotional. It was unpleasant, but that's not even inside the court. So this is a real systemic problem. Like overall, just the stigma attached to having to attend court and going through that process is not pleasant. And also, not everyone's guilty. So how about we just be respectful?
Yeah, with you there, 100%. I think it might be easier to do the three things that you want to get rid of. In this, it's always easier. All the interviews that I've done, it seems to be easier.
Three things I want to get rid of.
You don't have to do three things. Just yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, like the justice system as a whole, I don't want to just throw it away, but oh gosh, this is a difficult one. I'm sorry. I think legislation as a whole is a beautiful thing. I think it needs to be there to not only protect the vulnerable, but also protect adults that are vulnerable. Sorry, not the vulnerable children and young people, but also adults. And I mean, people who are struggling with substance misuse and even criminality, they are also very much vulnerable in their own way. But I do feel that there's elements of, in family law and youth law, it's just very punitive. And I know I'm speaking so generic, but because I feel like I can't nail it down right now. But I just think that it's very limiting. It's very limiting. It doesn't allow real expression, even if you have done something wrong. And I feel there needs to be a space for that. It's very rigid, and it's built in that way for a reason, isn't it? We know that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Mike, I don't know if you want to, or anyone else wanted to ask any more questions. Yes.
Straight in there.
Yeah.
All right. So, I don't know. I want to focus on what you was mentioning before about your young person, and the only way I can say it is you went above and beyond the duty of care, and you've done an amazing job from what I heard. How can we promote that to the other professionals who are working with young people who don't feel capable of going above and beyond that duty of care, the people who feel limited to the duty? So what advice would you actually give for those professionals?
Oh, what advice would I give? I think my advice would be it's easy to get it wrong. I get it wrong. But you can't be fearful of getting it wrong. You have to still try, and then you can always come back from that. There's always learning you can come back from that. Like, I had no idea how that was going to pan out. When I'm working with my young people, I have no idea how it's going to pan out. All I can do is attempt at what I know and listen as best as I can. I just listen as best as I can. I pick up on as much as I can at the time. And I have to be fearless, because my fragility in those moments of being fearful does not overpower the importance of the young person's life or the young person's experience. Because when I go home and I go to eat my dinner, I'm good, right? So it's really about, in those moments, what is more important. I am very much significant in those moments. And I think because as professionals that hold so much power and make huge decisions, it's really difficult for professionals to say, I'm insignificant right now. How I feel and what I think is just not necessary. It's not important. So yeah, I think I tell people to try to be less fearful. And when they are fearful, try to own that they're fearful, put that aside and try anyway. Be willing to fail, be willing to make mistakes, and be willing to learn from them.
Awesome. Yeah. So obviously the final actual question is something to do with the future, your hopes for the future, your aspirations for the future. Where do you see adolescence in the future? So how do you actually see the system changing in the next couple of years for young people?
I would hope that the system is more inclusive. I think that's just what I want for all young people, all children, all families. And even in some local authorities and some workplaces, more inclusive of professionals and staff on the front line too. Because I have definitely been in places where I will fight for families and young people, but it doesn't matter because where I am, it just is not somewhere that is received, where that is received. So I think I would love for, as a whole, systems to be more inclusive, take more action around take more action around the views of young people, children, their families, take more action around the feedback that comes from staff on the front line. That is, I think, really simple, but I think very much huge for communities. We would definitely start to see work that's been more tailored to who we're working for. We are ultimately working for families. They are paying their tax money. They are paying us. I joke, but it's a thing. You know, I get up every day for my children. That's who I work for. I get up to make sure that everything's good for them.